Kenneth Swansi is an associate professor at the Graduate School of IS, Philippines. He teaches corporate change, strategic management, corporate governance, leadership, business ethics, and economic theory. As an avid reader and reflective thinker, he has research and study interests in emerging ideas and tacit knowledge domains across different disciplines. His current research interests include leadership, organizational change, business ecosystems, resilience, social entrepreneurship, governance and business strategy. He believes in appreciate inquiry, innovation, grounded theory and value-based learning as primary modes of creating new knowledge to serve humankind. Besides teaching and lecturing, Dr. Swansi has also been consulting in India, Africa, Europe, US and Southeast Asia. He also enjoys interacting and engaging with students and people. Presently, he also serves as the Program Director for PhD in Business, and as the Dean of Graduate School at IS.
Natasha Nangoy is currently a PhD in Business candidate at Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies. She is interested to research more about working from home, and issues related to work-life balance. As a studying mother, in her spare time she enjoys doing arts and crafts.
Allow me to introduce to you our speaker this morning. Dr. Kenneth Swansi is an associate professor at the Graduate School of IS. Well, anyway, sorry to our online participants, allow me to greet you good morning. Dr. Kenneth Swansi teaches corporate change, strategic management, corporate governance, leadership, business ethics, economic theory, and he is an avid reader and a reflective thinker. He has research in study interests in emerging ideas in tacit knowledge domains across different disciplines. His research interests includes leadership, organizational changes, business ecosystem, resilience, social entrepreneurship, governance, and business strategy. He believes in appreciative inquiry, innovation, grounded theory, and value-based learning as a primary modes of creating new knowledge to serve humankind. Besides teaching and lecturing, Dr. Swansi has also been consulting in India, Africa, Europe, US, and Southeast Asia. And he enjoys interacting and engaging with students and people. Presently, he also serves as a program director of PhD in Business and as a Dean of Graduate School of IS. Another speaker is Ma'am Natasha Nangoy. She's currently a PhD and business candidate at Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies, Philippines. She is interested to research more about working from home and issues related to work-life balance. As a studying mother, in her spare time, she enjoys doing arts and crafts. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Sir Kenneth Swansi and Ma'am Natasha Nangoy.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to Dr. Ken Swansi and I. Before we start, what we are going to share with you today are some of the challenges, some of the lessons that we have learned throughout the process of writing a dissertation. You see, Dr. Kenneth Swansi here is my advisor, my mentor, and together he has advised with Dr. Leroy. Together they have advised me in writing this study.
Next. Okay. And it is our good fortune to have a good student like Ma'am Natasha And the research experience that we have had has been extremely fruitful and enjoyable. Yes, Natasha.
All right, just to give a bit of an introduction, these studies stemmed out because of the COVID-19 pandemic and because there was a lockdown, and the personal experience that we have during the pandemic led us to this interest. Then, of course, I had guidance from my mentors and conversations with my colleagues, and of course, the dissertation quest. So this is the outline of what we will present today. I think there are all these challenges. There are 8 of them. And then I will share my reflection as a student, and Dr. Swansi will share his reflection as an advisor. Then we will proceed with concluding thoughts. So the first point, establishing the research gap. These are some of the things that came to our mind when we were discussing about, challenges that were related to establishing the research gap in a grounded theory study. You see, many grounded theories have said that literature review is not associated with grounded theory methodology. In fact, some have said that we are, as researchers, grounded theory researchers, we are expected to limit preconceived notions, or we are not influenced by pre-existing theoretical frameworks. But how then do we address our pre-existing knowledge? How then do we ensure that our study is suitable for grounded theory methodology? And how do we develop theoretical sensitivity, which is crucial for a grounded theory study, without engaging with literature? Then there's also the challenge that most of researchers aren't independent, so we are tied into an institution. So there are institutional and ERB requirements, guidelines, and protocols that require us to produce literature review. So how do we go about this?
Natasha, can you tell us how did you arrive at what kind of a framework you would select to look for a research gap? There are many authors and there are many methodologies and framework. Can you tell us how you selected your preferred research gap framework?
All right, sir. So there is several research frameworks that helps us establish frameworks. But before we go to that, let's look at the grounded theory, sir. The grounded theory said there are 2 conflicting bodies. Some say, okay, let's do literature review. Others said, do not engage in any literature review. Those that said do not is because they said literature review can stifle and cloud the judgment of the researchers. They can also become ineffective because grounded theory can be very unpredictable. But those that supports literature review says it's important because we need to identify the gaps in research. Then we need to be oriented about the substantive area, build theoretical sensitivity, and help the researchers acknowledge their pre-existing knowledge and notions. Now, your question, sir. There are several experts and frameworks. As we can see here, there is Miles' taxonomy of research gaps. There is the framework from Mueller, Boch, and Franz, the framework for research gaps. Jacobs' 6 kinds of research problems. Robinson's and Saldana and McCoy types of research gaps. These are the frameworks for identifying research gaps.
And Natasha, you selected Miles 2017.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us why?
All right. So these are the decision points. I chose to follow the Straussian's advice that we need to engage in literature review at every stage, but of course with caution. And then as a result, we produce a literature review. The reason why I chose Miles' taxonomy as opposed to all the others, because Miles' taxonomy of research gap is very simple. simple, easy to understand. However, they seem like to incorporate the framework of Mueller-Bach and Jacobs 2011. So it's comprehensive, yet very simple to understand. And it identifies, helps researchers identify 7 research gaps: knowledge, theoretical, empirical, evidence, practical knowledge, methodological, and population gap. And previously here also, sir, I said it's important that when we are doing literature review, we need to accompany it with bracketing and addressing our preconceptions. And so there are frameworks that can help us do that. Like, for example, Tuport and Newman, or Creswell and Miller. And so these are the strategies taken to make sure that although we do a literature review, we engage with prior studies, we convey our statement of reflexivity, we communicate the intention, we acknowledge the existing knowledge and research, memoing throughout the study, because it's very important to distinguish between our thoughts, data from participants, and then what other grounded theories or researchers say. Of course, consulting with your research committee, member checking with the participants, and producing an audit trail and triangulation.
May I just come in here,
Yes.
Natasha? You know, from the advisor's point of view, it is very important for the advisor to guide the students in selective framework for literature review, if it is grounded theory, because there are different views, and more particularly in trying to identify a framework that the student can use in the search for research of knowledge gap. The search for the knowledge gap, research gap, can be something that you can adopt from a well-known academicians, an authority in the area, or you could synthesize one for yourself and defend what is the framework that you're going to use.
Correct, sir. So we now move on to point number 2, contextualizing the study. There are also differing opinions between grounded theories to contextualize or not to contextualize. If we were going to contextualize, what is the purpose and how do we go about it? If not, how do we then justify our research focus? How do we know and define what it is that we are trying to investigate? So there are, again, we consult the experts. Glaze said, no, don't contextualize, because research quest begins with just an interest, but not a defined statement of a problem. So we do not really decide on a research question. It's a very spare type of thing. But then there are also others like Strauss, Sharmas, and later on Mavera and Crows that said we need to contextualize, because we try to define the main concern or the phenomenon of the problem. We start with preliminary understanding of the substantive field, but we need to keep an open mind. Then we develop initial research questions. Then we revise along the way. That's why also the contextualizing helps us remain focused and allow us for flexibility. That is why my chapter 1 to 3 was not yet sent before data collection, because there were still, things that were revised along the way. So these are the frameworks for contextualizing. Shade 2020, Johns 2006, Rosen Fry 2001 helps us understand how we can contextualize. We can relate it to research. There's also micro level, like the workplace, institution, community, on a macro level, geographic territory, industry, almost the same with Rosia also here. Focus on setting, comparison with prior research, establishing a perspective. So in my case, in my study, I integrated 2. And this is how I went about contextualizing the study. And because of this was the result. So the population, the context, the perspective, the phenomenon, the cascading crisis, the big body of literature where it sits. So the scope of the study is defined here.
From the advisor's point of view, the setting becomes a very important, the setting of the study. And although, qualitative research kind of presupposes describing the setting and the context in a very, very rich and vivid manner, there are flavors of grounded theory, like the classical grounded theory approach, which actually discourages. But setting describing the setting in very rich and vivid terms adds so much to understanding why, how, in what circumstances the study is being done.
So we now move on to selecting the grounded theory methodological approach. As we discussed earlier, there is commonly three: the classical approach, the Strawsian approach, and the constructivist approach. However, sir, I do not really understand a lot. I've not done a lot of reading about the constructivist approach, so I can't say much about it. But I've done some reading about the classical approach and more reading about the Strawsian approach. There are several uniting principles, but there are also differences. Here are the differences. They're philosophical assumptions. Perhaps in classical or Glaser, it's a bit undefined. But in the Strawsian, it's constructivism with a hint of pragmatism, because Strawsian wants to find the best theory that works for that. Whereas in the constructivist, it's more of a symbolic interactionism. However, I can't speak much of Sharma's method. Then there's also, how do we identify the problem? In classical, it's emergent. In Strawsian, it's based on our experience, exposure, and of course, from literature. Then in, how do we use literature? In Glaser, no initial literature review. In Strawsian, yes, but with caution. Then the process of engaging a theory, emerging the theory, laissez-faire. This one, we utilize the actual coding paradigm. So the relationship with the participants, here it's independent, here it's very active. The coding process, a bit different, almost similar though, but this one is more prescribed. Then the evaluating process, this is how they evaluate the theory. And my approach was, I chose the Strawsian approach. The reason why I chose this is because I think it fits more with my philosophical assumptions. I believe that research is co-constructed, but there's also a hint of trying to find what works best. And I've done reading, so I'm saying that I do not come with any preconceived notion is, I think that's an academic dishonesty. So I have to say that I did some literature review reading before doing the study. And the process of identifying the problem is there. I have my research questions, and it provides a systematic coding framework, which I think is very useful for novice research. This is my first time doing grounded theory. And so without proper guideline, I didn't know how to go about coding and finding the concepts that comes from raw data. And so these are some of my reflections that I think I would like to share with the audience. The use of the Strawsian provides a template for a systematic and rigorous data generation process. The actual coding paradigm helps novice researchers segregate codes into basic elements of the theory: context, causal conditions, the phenomenon, actions, consequences, intervening conditions. Sir, we discussed that the Glaser also have these, but very wide options of coding categories. But here in the Strauss, he has sort of thematized it for better guidance for novice researchers. So like, although there's an option, because grounded theory methodology, like many qualitative research design, is emerging, you can combine different methods. Like in the case of Innocent Sigauke, he combined appreciative inquiry with grounded theory. That's okay, but it takes more time, more devotion. But you can also select one and develop an in-depth understanding of that particular approach.
Before we go to the next point, the reflection from the advisor's point of view is this. The dilemma the students have is, there are these three flavors of grounded theory, the classical, Straussian, constructivist, which of these? And so myself and Dr. Sikauki, who was my student, he also did grounded theory and inquiry together. We wrote a paper. And in that paper, we said, how do you oscillate between these three? Can you oscillate? Can you change midway? And these are some of the questions that we answered in that. And I would say that if you are a novel researcher, if you have not really had experience in grounded theory, it is perhaps better to begin with the Straussian model, just because they have a paradigm, a coding paradigm which you can use. They have a template, and you would find some theory. What happens is, otherwise, the classical approach, if you lack theoretical sensitivity, you really may not see theory when you reach the end of the study. But using the Straussian approach, you use the template, even though it may be perhaps not a very, very good theory, you get some theory.
Thank you, sir, for adding that. And I think if I didn't go to the Straussian approach, it would be very hard to, to conceptualize or to systematize all the different codes that emerge. So we now go to the iterative data generation. How do we justify the criteria for purposive sampling? How do we go about the theoretical sampling process? How do we collect data, interview participants during the pandemic? What are important aspects to consider when we are coding and analyzing data? So how do we justify the purpose of sampling? Here are some advice from the experts. It's important that we contextualize, as it helps us narrow down research focus. It helps us identify who are the right participants. Here also, Corbin and Strauss said it relies on the intuition or the experience of the researcher, because the researcher brings in some ideas to the phenomenon based on his knowledge and identifies the participants that can be selected for the study. Hence, our biases, our preconceptions comes in at this point. Our exposures shapes our intuition. And as qualitative researcher, we need to practice mindfulness and be sensitive of our context. Then, this is very important, participants' active consent. When we select our sample, make sure it's not a forced participation. The next thing, finding theoretical sample. It's very important that we make field notes and recognize emerging concepts or relationships that comes from data. How do we do this? We do this by having conversations with the data. When we finish transcribing, or even during the interview process, subconsciously we are asking the question, what, why, how did this person deal with this? What was the situation? So when we are continuously having conversations with data, sooner or later, concepts will emerge, which will help shape the theory. Memoing our thoughts and our musings is very important. And again, process consent is very important. How I go about this, sir, is that every time I finish an interview and I transcribe my data, I have my notes where I ask questions to the data. How did this person do? Then I answer. Then from the unanswered question, this leads to the next set of questions that I go and ask other participants.
Memoing is a very, very important process. Like Natasha just said, conversing with the data. Some experts also define it as massaging the data. We need to be in very close and intimate contact with the data, and it's only then the data will speak to you.
Online data collection. How do we utilize technology? How do we go about? When I was collecting the data, we finished. I think I need to finish defending my proposal mid-2021. And then we were collecting data from then on, but there was limited interactions. Thank God there was Zoom. And because Zoom allows, for participants to, there's this button, captioning, where you can see what the participants are saying. This helped me throughout the process of transcribing and generating the data. But of course, even though we are collecting data online, we need to still maintain respect, ethicality, checking with them, are you all right with this? I initially wanted my participants to also include some video logs about their daily life. But I think when I went through, they were objecting that. They said, oh, we are too busy and it will take so much time. I have to respect that. And I had to go back to my chapter 3 and revise and take that out completely because my participants were reluctant on sharing video logs. So I had to rely on interviews for my study. And it's very important that we have a schedule. Online interviews can be challenging, so set up a schedule with your interviews. This is how I set up my schedule. What type of consent was received, when was the interview session, when did I transcribe, when did I finish sending it to them for member checks, and then when did I receive the verification. It helps me keep track if I do have this in mind. And then now we go to the coding. First cycle coding, second cycle coding, and third cycle coding. So what happens in the first cycle coding? The first cycle coding is when there's open data. There's many methods of how we can code. It depends on the preference of the researcher. But as you can see here, I combine eclectic coding. So I combine different methods: in vivo, emotional, process, descriptive. And then I would suggest to my fellow friends and colleagues doing research, start using a research software, because it's very, very tedious if we have to do it manually. There's hyper research, there's in vivo, there's web QDA, and always consult with your methodologies. I'm very lucky, I actually have 2 methodologies. Dr. Gaikwad is my official methodologist. My second member, Dr. Leroy, I don't know where he went, he is my on-campus methodologist. He is very well versed on hyper research, and I'm glad that I consulted with him during the coding process. At first I did not, and I can tell you I did many coding because I didn't consult with him, thinking that I knew, but I didn't know.
Just a comment here. As an advisor, we always advise our students or the students who are embarking on their research that this phase is critical, very important, because your theory that you would want to come up with at the end of as an outcome of your research can only be as good as your coding. Coding is for, the theory is for.
So we move on to second cycle coding. This is where some of the magic happens, because then you try to categorize and organize, try to define properties and dimension. And then when Dr. Swansi told me, you need to define the properties and dimension. And then I went blank. What does he mean by properties and dimension? I do not have any property yet. So what should I do? Then this helped me understood. Properties are characteristics that describe a concept, while dimensions are variations within the properties that provide specificity and range of the concepts emerging. So for example, if we are talking about color, there's the properties are tint, tone, shade. The dimensions are the different kinds of color that tint, tone, shade produces. So we need to define. If we say, okay, corporate working routines, okay, what does that mean? Oh, they have a schedule. What type of schedule? Different kind of schedule. What type of lifestyle? Different kind of lifestyle. So we need to define that in the study. So it's like when we're doing open coding, we're generating so much data and we're trying to categorize. Let's look at this small example. How did the person organize from this to this? There was a framework. The framework was, all right, these colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo. From this, it turns to this. So this is what happens in the second cycle coding. Now, my data, open coding, how did I go about to categorize them? This is the framework, the Swansi coding framework. Help me. And from the open codes, because of the actual codes, categories emerge. And from those categories, I can group them into themes, which then produces propositions, the storyline, the theory. Here, the third cycle coding is very crucial and very challenging, very intuitive also, because the primary purpose is to identify the core category. What is the core category? It is the central phenomenon around which all the other categories are integrated. We are trying to find the mother category. I was very confused at this stage. And it was because coming to Dr. Swansi, engaging in different talks, I remember in one training, AQRA training, one participant asked, how can you justify that your core category is the right one? And I didn't know how to answer. So here is some of the reflections. Consult with your research committee, always. The advisor, methodologies member, experts in research software, member checks your participants play an important role in literature review. Before we move on, any additions there?
Yes, just a couple of words on, encoding and trying to develop properties and dimensions. This is one of the most difficult part to conceptualize. Here you need to understand what is the concept, how do you analyze a concept, what are the different properties of a concept, and then dimensioning. And then lastly, pattern recognition, which is very, very important. You know, you saw, can you put that colors, yes, the previous one. No.
This one? Oh.
Yes, yes. You know, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories. And within each category, there is variations. Some are lighter, some are. How do you develop these dimensions and these properties of the concept that you're trying to understand is not easy. And how do you see this in data? This usually becomes a challenge both for the advisor and the advisor.
Thank you, sir. So we will move on to crystallizing the core category. So how do we make sure that the core category is the right one? So here, there are several frameworks that can help us, define what the core category is. Halton and Walsh said we need to find something that is central, frequently occurring, relevant to the participant, has grab, and allows variability. Almost the same as the concept that Glaser said, fit, workability, relevance, and modifiability. So these were some of the questions that I asked myself. What does this data speak of? What is it trying to tell me? What big category can explain the phenomenon I am investigating? What is something similar, unique that all the cases are accounted for? If I look at the actions and strategies, what is a broad concept? And if there is a concept that all other categories can relate, what is this? So this is how I tried to understand, but this is a bit ambiguous. Let's go to this one. This is first cycle coding, going to second cycle coding, and finally, the core category emerges. But you see, it's very intuitive. It's
personal.
Very personal, very personal. Here, I said here, arriving at the core category is a very intuitive process, must go through several rounds of trials and error, requires theoretical sensitivity. Reading other literature helps. Books, art, unrelated subject, current issues. If we look at other theories from the other substantive areas, we have conversations with our participants, with our mentors, with our advisors. We have conversations with children, with friends, with colleagues. Sleep on it. This is his advice. Sleep on it. Sleep over it. Dream about it. Go out in nature. Pray about it. read the Bible. You'll be surprised to see the concepts that comes from the Bible, and make sure that you understand that it is a very personalized process. So here, from here to here to here. But see this. This can also turn to this, or this, or this. Other researchers may have different interpretation of the same data, arriving at theoretical saturation. Okay, this is the process. We arrive at theoretical saturation because when we feel that similar concepts, different wording, no new codes are emerging. Researchers will start predicting the comments. I think in starting participant 15, I could start predicting what the person was going to say. She's going to say this. True. Then when I consulted with him, he said, your data is starting to get saturated. Collect more to see. So I did a focus group discussion and see to triangulate things. The axis starts to get populated. You have an answer to the research question. The storyline can be developed. And this is very important. The use of theory building function. Theory rules, this is a very important, I know Dr. Sapari must know this. There is this theory rules function in hyper research that we need to utilize because it helps us saturate our data. Let me try to see if I can, click on the theory rules. Verse 1. So there. Is it opening? Okay, if not, then we are out of time. Next, just okay, for next time, anyone who wants to see, we can go back to
While they're setting up, just a few comments.
the other ones.
Theory building, especially in grounded theory, is a very important yet a difficult task. And some understanding as to what is theory, what are the basics of theory building, what are the different types of theory, what is theoretical sensitivity, these aspects are very important. And unless you are kind of the intricacies of theory building is known, you actually cannot. We have a workshop that I conduct every Friday for our students, where we teach students how to build new theories. And so basic understanding and a grasp of this is important.
Let me go through just quickly. These are the codes. And when we click this into the function using all the if, and, or function, and if it's a yes, it will come to that. It will show. Then that becomes the basis of my propositions. Dr. David, can you scroll down? These are all the list of them. So this is tying your data categories to your propositions. Down. Then from the propositions, scroll at the bottom, sir, we develop the storyline. At the bottom, other page, that is a storyline from the propositions. When we are able to produce a storyline that explains the phenomenon and the situation and how the participants were able to cope, then I think the theory is there. Can we go back to the presentation?
And as we are going back to the presentation, just one comment. You know, hyper research usually looks at if-then type of logics. There are other types of logics that Glaser points out in the family of codes that can be used. And you can actually, you can program the software to look for other types of logic, but it becomes a little difficult problem.
So just to run by, these were the results of the theory testing. Tested on all the participants, we were able to see that 17 out of the 21 cases proved true. The other are 4 negative cases, but which strengthens the theory. And then, so just an example, how do we present storylines, the use of metaphors, again, the substantive theory, the theoretical framework. What is very important, convey boundaries and limitations. What are the boundaries? You need to make sure if we are proposing a new term, definitions help guide us what it's about, but we need to also present the boundaries because it's very tight to substantive area, the phenomenon, the employee's internal perspective, and the limitations of the pandemic, the causal condition, and the metaphor that we are using.
Just a comment here, defining the boundary conditions for you that you claim you have developed is very important because we don't develop universal theories. All theories have boundaries and very clear boundary, where your theory can work, where it will not work is important. And here sometimes it's a humbling experience that to say that our boundaries cannot work in these large other contexts. It can work only here. But that is what we as researchers need to do, very clearly define boundaries where our theories would work.
All right, sir. Before we end, let me give some of my lessons learned. It's important that when we are doing research, we find our community. I'm glad Dr. Swansi started that. Every Friday, we meet with a community of scholars and discuss issues. AQRA conferences help us practice, build confidence, get feedback, constructive criticisms from friends, colleagues, advisors, mentors. We need to also establish our own system, our own rhythm of writing. Practice makes progress. Don't forget, pray, eat, rest, unwind, then get back to work. Memo the progress. Memo everything that you did. Know your limitations. As a PhD student, know what it is. Thing that I realized when I'm doing these studies there is that there are questions that I was able to answer, but I'm left with many other questions that I'm unable to answer. And that's why it's called PhD, permanent head damage. I would like to recommend to administrators, please make sure that there is a psychologist or a psychiatrist even in school, because, you know, researchers, we get emotional, irritable, especially when mentors and advisors ask us many things. That can become a contribution to permanent head damage. And you know who receives this? Our family. Our immediate family are the ones who receive this. So if we do not suffer from permanent head damage, might be them. They might be the ones suffering from all this research we are doing. Find time to appreciate our loved ones. Find a good mentor, a good research committee. And I don't know if you know this, sir, our business students, we have a calling for our names. We are Swansians. So I am not a believer only in the Straussian approach. I am also a Swansian.
I would just like to modify the last one. You know, Natasha had just said find a good mentor. From the advisor's point of view, find a good advising. And Natasha has been a great student.
Thank you, sir. So just a little bit of addition. This is what you can include in your memos. We have different styles. I write in Excel. That's how I produce my data. Others write in Word. You may write in your own style. So before we end, any other words, sir?
You know, grounded theory is not easy. And only the best in the sense who are willing to work hard, willing to read, willing to immerse in data, must take it. And once you're there, stay by it. Like they say, you know, in grounded theory, and grounded theorists have a saying, if you massage the data long enough and hard enough, it will scream out a theory. It's just that you have to be a little patient to see that theory emerges. Thank you.
Before we end, let me add just this one. Just a short thought. Urquhart said, like Dr. Shan said, doing grounded theory or any research is difficult but rewarding. We need to collaborate with research committees, other scholars like AQRA here. Dr. Swansi told me this. One time I went to his office and I was very stressed because I was making very little progress. And I remembered this. He said, you know, Natasha, writing a dissertation is like cooking a curry. You have to let the pot simmer for long for the flavors to be extracted and come out. But sir, I may have burned the pots. So long. Another thing, when that time comes, when you're very, very stressed, Dr. Rosario said, when it's the darkest of the night, that means dawn is breaking very, very soon. There is hope at the end of the long, long, long tunnel. And so I end with this thought from Dr. Shauna Remeister, from that sage handbook. Theories and advices are good, but the best way to learn the finer points of how to do grounded theory or any other qualitative research is to try. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful presentation. I do not like as much as I do not like to end it because of the presentation and the excitement that we are learning. We are here 5 minutes, and I think we can entertain 2 to 3 questions from the audience. Yes, we have the back. Mama Rosario will come next.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm very happy to see I'm very happy to see a grounded theory conducted. First of all, right? AUP, for example, probably takes like around 2 or 3 semesters to conduct a longitudinal study. In your case, I don't know how long you 2 years. 2 years. Wow. Okay, From so conception to yeah, okay. So my question is, because you presented the different paradigms in terms of establishing the literature review, right? And Strauss and Corbin, as well as Charma's caution literature review. And how did you take that step in taking precautions in conducting literature review when whenever we will be establishing theory or grounding a theory, we need to know if there is novelty, right, in the theory we are grounding. Otherwise, we will be frustrated at the end of the day that we are not grounding anything new at all. So if it will just be reinventing the wheel or we're just following whatever has already been established. So that the conduct of the literature review should really be establishing the research gap. And with that, reflexivity is really necessary. And I don't know if how you interpreted that caution. Thank you very much, Tom, for the question. So we did do a literature review because I had to acknowledge my pre-existing knowledge and to announce to the audience that, hey, I'm doing this study not with a blank mind, not with an empty mind. I've had this pre-existing knowledge. However, it does not become the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework that guides my study, as opposed to other qualitative studies that grounds a study on a particular theory or a quantitative study that grounds themselves on a particular theoretical framework. I'm just announcing that these are the present knowledge. There are gaps to be filled, and so it helps me contextualize where I'm going to research, what I'm going to study. And as such, when I'm producing a new theory, that theory currently, as of my limited knowledge, does not exist yet in the current knowledge. It may be in different terms, it may have different, it may have similar words, but the idea behind it may not be new, I mean, may not be something that is already there. It's a new thing, a combination of things that came from the participants, from the crowd. It's not based on literature. And that's why, as you mentioned, it's very important that we bracket. We say our statement of reflexivity, we tell them this is what we know, and we cannot hide that this shapes the way we think or we conceptualize ideas.
Thank you, Lilas. Maybe because of limited time, maybe follow-up will be done private. Will it be all right? Maybe ask Ma'am Rosario.
Natasha, I would like to say that we are very proud of you. We are happy because here you have raised the bar on how to do a dissertation. Doing a dissertation is one, documenting and reflecting on the process is another. And as far as I know, you are the first one who did that. Document, reflect, and share. There may be others who have documented but not reflected. There may be others who have documented and reflected but not shared. But you did the three. So to all of us who are advisors, this can be one paradigm that we can adopt. That we are not content that our students are done with their dissertation, but that we encourage them to document, to reflect, and also to share. I like the framework that you did, asking questions, seeking what experts did, wrote about, and coming up with their distilled advice, and then coming up with your own choice and rationalizing your choice. Dr. Safari and I have reflected that now we can die. That's what we do when we see somebody who can take our place. Now we are assured that the future is bright. I would like to encourage all advisors that once their student is done with their PhD, the student is not only an expert in the field, but also at least, I do not demand expertise in all designs, at least an expert in that design that he or she used in his or her dissertation. That while there are still questions to be answered, but the student has come to the level of right questioning and knowing who the experts are, and even having conversations with experts and recognizing that he or she is still ignorant. Thank you.
May I respond to what Dr. Asli had just said in a couple of words? Dr. Asli and Dr. Safari, I share the same sentiments that you have expressed. The real joy, the real reward of being an advisor or a professor, someone guiding a PhD student is in this. If a student can produce this, we are happy and willing to leave the stage. We are ready to leave the stage. Natasha is the 5th student doing grounded theory. Dr. Sumia Fukapuka, who was the founding member of AQRA, was one of my advisees. He was the first one who did the proper theory, followed by Carlos Biaggi, and Annabella, Innocent Sikauke, Innocent, and at each stage, as a life of advisor, we saw the templates and the bars of grounded theory going higher and higher and higher. With Innocent Sikauke, we published about 3 or 4 papers together. 2 of these papers were methodological papers, and then the bar is really high. Congratulations.
Before we end, let me just say, did you not see what he did? He was the one guiding all the grounded theories from the beginning until now. So if we have come to this point, it's because we are all Swansian. Please clap your hands for my mentor, my advisor, who made it all happen. Thank you for grounding me for 2 years. I'm ready to be released.
Thank you so much. May we ask the presenter to be on stage for the awarding of certificate. In behalf of the AQRA family, allow me to award this certificate of recognition to Dr. Kenneth Swansi. Same certificate is also awarded to Ma'am Natasha Nangoy. Thank you so much. Thank you to our presenter. Once again, good morning.